So the new government has inherited a number of interweaving crises in education, but one of the most severe is teacher recruitment and retention. We can't recruit the teachers we need. We can't keep hold of those we manage to recruit. Previous governments have missed recruitment targets year on year as a combination of real terms pay cuts, obscene workloads and severe pressure of the current accountability system puts off would-be trainees and drives teachers away. Last year, we recruited over 13,000 fewer teachers than were needed. 40% of teachers leave the profession within 10 years. What's Labour's solution? A fairly vague at this stage plan to recruit 6,500 new teachers in shortage subjects. How will they achieve that? That's a question we're hoping to find some answers for today. Now, the recent 5.5% pay rise approved by the Chancellor will help, but doesn't go all the way to pay restoration that unions have been arguing for. Bridget Phillipson has also sought to reset the relationship with the sector and has signalled a return to social partnership working with unions. But this crisis is multifaceted and runs deep through the system, and we won't solve recruitment and retention if we look only at pay and not at workload. So I'm hoping today's panel can give us some insight into both the sector's thinking, what people working in the sector and with the sector think will solve these issues, and also from our two MPs here today, some insight into what the government is thinking on this area and how it might move forward. So I'm going to kick off by asking everyone to give some brief opening remarks, about 5 minutes or so, each setting out their thoughts on the main challenges in the teacher workforce crisis and thoughts on solutions for Labour to tackle it. I just realised I forgot to get my phone out for the timer. I'm not going to be particularly strict. I'm not going to be cutting people off bang on 5 minutes. But if you start to get nearer to 8, I might start to get irritated. But let's see how we get on. I'm going to ask Gordon from Etio first to start us off.
Good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to be here. So I, in true management consultancy fashion on the train, I did a grid of 7 or 8 or 9 ideas, retention and recruitment in one column, things that we would have to pay for, things that we could probably do without paying much money, almost cost-free things. And I'll just pick out in my order of priority the 5 things, which are subject-specific, continuous professional development, flexible working, reducing the stress loads on teachers, becoming the best sector for women to work in, and what I have come up with this phrase, the purpose premium, which I'll explain more, but do keep me to time because I haven't got wonderful scripts like everyone else. So start with the first one, subject-specific CPD, i.e. training, on-the-job training to teachers in the classroom over the course of their career. The Etio runs and has run for at least 10 years the National Centre for Excellent Teaching Maths, which is all the maths teachers in England get free at the point of use CPD through the 40 maths hubs. And from a policy perspective, this seems like an obvious win-win-win. Not only do you drive up, if it's good CPD, you drive up the quality of teaching and learning in the classrooms, but we know from that programme that it is sustaining maths teachers in the profession. They are anecdotally coming back and saying we thought about leaving the profession, but we're so pleased at the quality of this programme and the efficacy of the programme that we want to stay. So to give you an example, within the 40 hubs around the country, there are groups of maths teachers who then decide to upskill, get accredited. They become what we call LLMEs, local leaders of mathematics education. They drive forward the local CPD and become sort of subject specialists within their peer group. There's about 4,000 to 5,000 of them in the country. They're genuinely sustaining and driving forward maths in our country as a small group of people, and they feel respected. And these are people that have chosen not to go down the head of department or head teacher route. They've got now a different pathway that keeps them interested in the profession. So subject-specific CPD, maths happens to be a very generously funded one, so is English. Not many of the other subjects in our country, in our country's curriculum get similarly generous CPD packages. It pays for itself if my hypothesis is true that teachers value it and they stay. it would quickly pay for itself while improving the entire quality of the system. So that's my big one. Flexible working is now in the we don't necessarily have to pay more to do this across schools. What I observe is there has been for a year or 2 years a DFE toolkit. There's been in the press recently, Dixon's have done the 9 days out of 10. I think flexible working means many different things to different people. It's a bit disingenuous to say it can be completely cost-free because it depending on what schools are doing. My general observation, to keep things brief, is if we're genuinely in a crisis, which I think we are, why are we, as you know, this is in our gift to change now and push forward and let 1,000 flowers bloom. Let's not wait till Dixon's particular pilot goes right. Let's get this right, because it's probably true that schools will never be as flexible as, for example, Etio, which is a 100% remote working organisation. But I think they can be more flexible on average than they are now. And if that keeps even 3 or 4% of the turnover down, why don't we look at that? Stress on teachers. Now, in preparing for this panel, I talked to a number of MAT chief execs, friends of mine, colleagues of mine, and one of them made a very interesting observation that education is a highly regulated, highly unionised, compliance-rich, high-stakes sector. So is aviation. Why don't school leaders, and these are his words, not mine, why don't they systematically de-escalate those high-stakes moments, systematise how, as institutions, schools deal with things like Ofsted inspections, and then make the take that pain and aggro away as much as can be done from the daily stress of being a teacher, in order that it just becomes similar to, by extension, the aviation industry, the black box culture, where we do learn from high stakes mistakes, but we don't. There's not quite such a level of culpability and blame that's thrown around, and that might be one less push factor driving teachers away from the profession if that was the cultural norm. Going back, so retention, just to be clear, I think of the two parts of the equation, it makes a lot of sense to me to just let's fix retention as fast as we can. Hopefully from today, the fewer teachers that start leaving the profession, the better. On the other hand, I think we also have to recognise that all of our career pathways are much less linear than they used to be, and we shouldn't be afraid to let teachers leave the classroom, go and have secondments, go and do other jobs, but we need to make the barriers to return a lot less high friction, so that we can, schools and MATs and areas can keep hold of that wider population of trained talent and also encourage them back in for spells at the time. Women, this is on the recruitment side. It's a 75% female staff sector. Even if schools had a above average return to work, after mat leave kind of compassionate policy, that by itself, in my view, would be enough to move the needle, because very few sectors have very good mat leave return policies. And why wouldn't you want 70% of your workforce to love being in schools and have the best experience they can? The final thing I'll say is purpose premium. So all the teachers I know completely recognise how meaningful and the social mission of their work. That is obviously a key aspect of the job. It's vocational, keeps you interested, and you have every day you have a reminder of the importance of your work. On the other hand, I feel like as a sector we're quite apologetic and browbeaten about it, and we don't sort of instantly say this is the best job in the world. Our children should definitely start thinking about this as their own career choices. And shockingly, the same, one of the MAT chief execs who I spoke to, his son's just graduated, and he explicitly told his son not to go into the education profession. He doesn't think the deal is worth it anymore, and that's a not a good situation to be in, where our own school leaders' offspring are being advised against joining the profession. And I just think, so we've got this moment, we've had the union success, they did negotiate a 5.5% rise. Can we also now as a corollary to that rise, stop talking down the profession and saying how amazing it is, because how can we fix the next 10, 20 years of recruitment if it's already underfunded? We know it's underfunded. It's going to remain uncompetitive on pay probably forever. But the thing it can do that very few other professions could do is this purpose premium. Let me stop there.
Thank you, Gordon. Some really interesting points you make there around flexible working. I'm looking at some polling here that PLMR has provided that they did recently, where people were asked to select the things that would make them consider being a teacher. Now, more competitive pay was selected as a positive factor by 29%, but better flexible working options was only just behind that at 24%. And there was a really interesting report out from Teach First recently that looked at that issue of non-linear careers and how Gen Z, the people who are currently entering the workforce, the graduate workforce, they want multiple careers throughout their lives. And I think we do need to look very seriously about giving them ways to do that. I'm going to go to Tom next. Tom is the CEO of an academy trust. I'm really keen to hear what you do in your trust and what you think could be done sort of by the government and by schools, by trusts to improve things.
Great, let's do this in 5 minutes. So I want to just continue that theme of the purpose premium. I think that's a helpful framing to think about how important this is. Teachers make a huge difference to society, they make a huge difference to children, they make a huge difference to our schools. One of the phrases that we often hear is that the school system can't exceed the quality of its teachers, and that's true. And I was really encouraged that in this recruitment drive, the phrasing of that is around expert teachers, and that's really important as well, because we know that high quality teaching is the single biggest lever that we have available to improve schools, to improve outcomes for young people. We know that the best teachers teach children in a year 4 times more than the least effective teacher in the sector. That's a huge amount. So the value that high quality experienced teachers bring into the education sector is really significant. There are 4 things that I wanted to say. The first is that this challenge, although we're talking about it at a high level, that it's a big number, and the stats we often talk about are the aggregate stats, whatever percentage it is that are leaving each year. This is very much a specific problem in the way that we need to go about solving it. So I think the regional disparities, the subject disparities, and the disparities around disadvantage are really important for us to consider in this problem. It's not that we don't have enough teachers per se, it's that we don't have, for example, we run 44 schools across the country. It's really hard to get maths teachers in Runcorn. It's really difficult to get DT teachers in the schools we run down near Southampton, and it's very hard for us to get maths and physics teachers into lower Stofton parts of Suffolk. So when we're thinking about the sorts of policy ideas that we might want to take on, one of the things I think is really important is we think about how we target them, and we think about some of the ways that we can incentivise around different subjects. And we know, for example, that we're going to see in the next few years less of a demand for primary teachers as the pupil demographics shift, and we end up needing fewer primary spaces. This whole thing around retraining and looking at particular subjects. The second thing is you're right to focus on retention, because if we weren't losing as many teachers, then we wouldn't need to hire as many. It's also worth saying that retention is a global trend. So our retention statistics, our recruitment statistics, we're not an outlier in England, and often some of the analysis points to causal relationships between things that are happening in our policy environment, when in fact this is a global trend, and it's one that we're grappling with across different systems. The third thing I wanted to say is about the connection to other policy development areas. So we've got a curriculum review taking place at the moment. We've got an inspection and regulation work that's happening as well. We're expecting to see more on special educational needs and disabilities. And we can't view each of these different policy areas in silo. All of these have potential upsides and potential downsides on teacher workload, teacher morale, and our ability to attract and retain teachers in the future. If we go back 10 years and think about what was happening then, at the same time, the government reformed the special educational needs system at the same time as reforming curriculum, and put together the amount of sort of pressure that put into the system on workload in schools was really, really significant. So I think there's another thing for us to think about, how these different parts of the policy reform programme connect together. Another thing on retention is, you're right, Freddie, to talk about some of the things that we know people say from outside the profession about why they might want to come in, and often that's about pay, about flexibility, those sorts of things. But we know the reason that people leave teaching, and it's because of challenging behaviour. It's because they don't like the leadership and they find it difficult, the culture that they're working in. And it's because often they're being asked to do things that they don't see the value in. And teachers aren't people who don't want to work hard. Often they will work long hours and they'll give lots to the profession. But what they find really demotivating is doing things that they think are pointless. This is what Dr. Sam Sims calls fluff load. And it's the sense that they'll work really hard on areas that they know make a difference to kids, on areas that they really value and are motivated by. And then the last thing I want to say is about how we go at this. There are things obviously that trusts do, and we're doing a lot with our staff around professional development. We're looking at some of the flexibility. We'll probably pilot some things similar to Dixon's. We've done some things similar in other parts of our schools, how we can share curriculum resources so everyone's not having to write their own curriculum resources, all these sorts of things. But the big thing, of course, for government are those big government levers on pay, on incentives, targeted incentives on different subjects in different areas. And I think two specific things. One is, I would say, there's a thing about how we incentivise, not just on subject, but on place, and in particular on levels of disadvantage in schools. We know that where there's high levels of disadvantage, that they're the places where we need teachers the most. And I think even on funding, we know it's going to be very difficult to do anything big on funding in the financial environment that we're likely to be in. But one of the things that would make a real difference is stability and predictability around funding in trusts. And for example, we've already started the school year, and we still don't know what the cost of our staff will be for the year that we're in. So it's a really challenging environment for trusts and employers to set budgets, to give stability. And I think there's, even without more money, there are advances that we can make on the way that we go about funding and the timelines and so on, which would make things a lot better. Sorry, that's 6 minutes. For
that's all right. Yeah, you can see the stopwatch. Thank you for that. Yes, some really important things to think about. You know, there is a lot that's going to happen over the next sort of couple of years, and it's really, really important that is joined up in a way that it doesn't, just heap more on schools. I think we need to be sort of very conscious of that. I'm going to ask Leora now. The Confederation of School Trusts is a representative body for academy trusts, and I'm really keen for your take on what solutions you're hearing from your members, but also what's standing in the way of them doing those things.
Thanks, Freddie, and hello, everybody. I want to start by saying that we have a great education system in England, and I just don't think we should forget that, and I don't think that we say it often enough. But our education system is a bit fragile at the moment, and one of the things that's creating that fragility is, I think, the way that teachers, leaders, and the other staff in our schools are feeling about how it feels to be in a school. So I'm going to start with where Tom started, just by saying that I think that only the government can pull the big levers of state that really are about getting enough teachers, the supply of teachers into the system. So only the government can pull those great big levers of state. We need government to do that. We need government to kind of stay in its lane and to do that work around the big levers of state. But there's so much more that we can do as leaders in the system. So let me start with some data, which it's a little bit of a story actually. So before Christmas, I read, as I'm sure others in the room have read, a really, really worrying report. It's called the Teacher Wellbeing Survey. It's published every year by Education Support. And this is what it says. It's corroborated, by the way, with data from the working lives of teachers. It said that 78% of education staff working in our schools report being stressed, 78%. This rises to 89%, so nearly 9 in 10, of all leaders in our school system, and an astonishing 95% of head teachers. 95% of our head teachers are feeling stressed. More than a third of teachers report experiencing burnout. So this is not sustainable. And it really sort of stopped me in my tracks, reading that data and reflecting on that data. And then, of course, the obvious thing is to say, well, it's Ofsted's fault. It's the accountability system. It's everything outside of our schools. Now, I'm 100% certain, for the avoidance of doubt, that a high-stakes adverse accountability system is creating some of that pressure. And I think we do need to reform Ofsted, and I think we do need to reform our accountability system. But this is the thing that struck me. How do we feel about that as the leaders in the system, as the chief execs of multi-academy trusts? How do we feel about that? Do we feel there's nothing we can do? We have no responsibility for the way that our teachers and our staff and our leaders are feeling. I don't think that's true, because we set the climate, and we create the conditions in our trust, and we develop the cultures within our organisation. So I think there's quite a lot more that we as leaders can do. Hand on heart, there's more we can do, and there's more that we should be doing. So about a week later, after I read this education support reports, the Education Endowment Fund, the EF, published an absolutely fascinating, and I think completely underread, rapid evidence review on the things that the evidence tells us that we can do as leaders to stop this flow of teachers and staff out of our schools and to retain our staff. So the focus that I wanted to bring to this panel is what we can do as employers and as leaders in the system. And the thing that surprised me is that what the evidence points to isn't really rocket science. So if we want to make our schools brilliant places to work, then we need to do just 3 things. This is what the evidence says, 3 things. The first is we need to prioritise professional development, real professional development, cultures of professional development. I don't mean insect days. I mean really evidence-informed cultures of professional development, so that people, our staff in our schools, not just our teachers, can become experts, because there's a huge sense of agency and empowerment in that. So prioritising professional development is the first thing the evidence says we can do to retain our staff. The second thing is building relational trust. So as leaders, how do we go about very deliberately, very purposefully building relational trust with this staff in our schools? And I think we just don't pay enough attention to that, actually. So I think we need to pay much more attention to the relational element of leadership, which I think is underdeveloped at the moment, particularly in the way that we educate our leaders to become head teachers, to become executive leaders in trusts. And the third thing the evidence points to is improving working conditions. So I was fascinated by this, because what this doesn't only say workload, although workload is definitely captured in that third point about improving working conditions. But it's wider than workload. So this is not about a list of 10 things that teachers won't do anymore. It's actually about looking at teaching in the round and thinking about how we can improve working conditions. And Gordon, I loved your use of the word purpose premium. And I think I probably want to come back to that and perhaps just end there. I think teaching is a very ancient and probably the noblest profession. It is a wonderful profession. Education is, after all, the building of who we can be as a society. And teachers shape the next generation. They shape minds, they nurture potential, they help children to lead good lives. So those of us who educate, those of us who work in schools, this is fundamentally meaningful work. And that Gen Z population that the Teach First report points to, this speaks to them. This sort of sense of purpose, of making a difference in the lives of children, it speaks directly to them. So both in terms of the recruitment of our teachers, attracting the next generation of teachers in, that Gen Z generation, who, as Luke Sparks from Dickinson said, we shouldn't scoff at. We really should not scoff at, we should take them seriously. But also creating our schools as brilliant places to work. This is the job of leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, some really important things to think about there, and I think it moves it on nicely actually to us hearing from the two MPs on the panel today, because of what you said about the government needing to stick to that sort of big lever, and then we look then at a sector level at what we can do with that. So I'm going to ask Sarah now to speak about, and I'm hoping you can give us some insight about how the government envisages achieving its goal of 6,500 teachers, but also how it will go beyond that, because it's not just 6,500 teachers that's needed. We clearly need to create a better experience for those working in the sector. So I'm really keen for your thoughts.
Thank you. My name is Sarah Smith. I'm the MP for Hyndburn, and I like to say Hyndburn and Hasling because it always gets forgotten. And I was recently very privileged to have the opportunity to be the National Mission Champion for the Opportunity Mission. So this is the idea that in order to turn around the country around and set us up for decades ahead, we've created these 5 missions, which is the idea of bringing people from different departments, ministers from different departments around the table in order to tackle these really embedded, difficult foundations that we need to strengthen and build upon for the future. And I've spent the last, I sit here, hopefully not by accident. The reason that I first got involved in politics is the same reason I'm sat here today, and that was, for me, it was like volunteering in a youth club not long after I finished uni, and just realising the differences between the doors that opened for me because I had a decent state education and parents that backed me up, compared to these young people I was volunteering in that youth club with. And they had so much potential, they were so much smarter than I was, but they were never going to have those chances. And I just realised how wrong that was, and I decided I was going to stop the job I was doing then and start working in the charity sector, and that's always been the reason that I kind of get up every day. And so over the years, I've done a number of different things. I've never been a teacher, but I've worked really, really closely with schools and with charities that are partnering with schools to try and tackle educational disadvantage. And most recently, I spent a couple of years leading a big programme in Blackpool, which, as everyone will know, is probably one of the towns in this country that has some of the worst educational outcomes. And I'm going to tell the story of one of the schools there just because it brings it into such stark focus, what you were saying, that it's really important that we don't just think about this as a whole problem. There are specific parts of the country and specific young people and communities for whom this is a much bigger problem than others, and we have to be really clear on that as we're trying to build the solutions. So one of the schools in Blackpool is called South Shore Academy, and it's had many different names over the last probably 30 years as it's kind of gone from one set of leadership, one trust to another. One time I went into that school and I sat down with one of the team, one of the deputy heads, and they said it was just the start of term, and it's day 2, I think, after the summer holidays. They'd already had, and I saw these 2 year 7s who were literally threatening the staff, physically threatening the staff. They already had 2 of their year 7s that they were considering needed basically exclusion on day 2 of term because their behaviour had already been so challenging and so difficult. A few weeks later, I went back in. They said, I think we've got 48 kids in our year 7s that are unidentified quite significant levels of SEND. That school, a few months later, got another bad RI Ofsted report, and of course the solution was, because they were 2 times RI, well, we need a new trust, we need to change the leadership. There was no way that was going to be the solution to this school's problems. This school's problems are hugely complex and systemic, that we don't have the SEND elements are not working, that the parents in those communities are leading very complex, chaotic lives. They're not getting the support. They don't have they're obviously living in poverty. There's not the social workers able to tackle those problems. So school is social work, food bank, clothes bank, and then you got the behaviour issues, and then you're blaming the head teacher who was doing her absolute utmost to deliver the best she could for those children. And I say that because when we talk about teacher recruitment and retention, unfortunately, it's not just a big lever of how we hire 6,500 new teachers. We have to see this as a big it's a systemic challenge, which is culture is really, really important in our schools, and the leadership of those schools is so important. And do we invest in our school leaders across the country consistently in the same way? No, we don't, because I've lived in London and I've seen the opportunities that heads in London had to be part of lots of development programs. A lot of them are ran in that part of the country, etc., etc. And then you get out to the more challenging parts of the country, and because they don't have enough staff, they're having to fill in, they're teaching maths, they're doing this, that and the other, so they don't get the opportunity to go off on those leadership development opportunities. So the culture that is set by a school leader and the opportunities that school we give across the country to develop our future leaders and the current leaders, I think is really, really important. And that comes also to the point around work conditions, not just being about pay and not just being about flexibility. And it's not just about like 9 days out of 10. It's also about, well, can you teachers don't want to have to not do school drop-off or school pick-up. So can you start to be even more flexible in how your days are laid out? And it really challenges the sector if we can start to do some of those things, but that starts to stem some of the tide that we're facing. Then I think as well, I think what's really important about what Labour and how we are addressing some of these challenges right now is we're not going to do the sort of top-down approach that happened a decade ago. And the establishment of the commission and the independent people, experts coming around the table to work with the sector and with trade unions on the curriculum review, on all the other areas that we're looking at. I think that's such an important difference of approach that says to schools and to teachers, we value that you are the experts and we want to work with you on the changes that are needed to make schools be the place that you want to work. And then I think also like that piece around teachers coming sort of in and out of the sector. Again, I've just been spending a lot of time thinking about how we deliver really excellent careers education and how we tackle the NEET problem. And, we need to get our teachers with more industry experience so that they can bring that into the classroom. We should be, again, finding ways to celebrate and encourage that, because that actually strengthens what the children obviously receive in the classroom. So I think there's a few kind of positive ideas there about some of the things that I think we have to look at. But in summary, in this discussion, as I say, like in some ways it's nice to be able to think, if we just put pay up a little bit, and obviously it's very, very important that we have made some progress. I know it's not where we want to get it to, but it's important that we're making teachers aware that we value them and that we believe that they should be well paid. Of course, they should be the highly skilled professionals that we depend upon for the future of our nation. But it goes far beyond any of these like little levers. I think we have to think about it in the whole and start to be tackling these issues bit by bit in order to make the progress that we all want to see.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks. I think we'll probably come back to some of those issues that you raised in the sort of general discussion later, because I think you have correctly identified a lot of the issues that we face, and the government has. When we've heard Bridget Phillips speak, she has identified these issues. I think what people need to hear now is how, and I know you said that there are many different levers, but I think it's rationalising all of that and bringing it all together that's the big piece of work, and I know that that's what's going on at the moment. So, Sonia, if you, I'm keen to hear sort of your insight from again what you've heard in your constituency, but also what you think government needs to be doing to deal with this issue.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to the panel today. Education is also a big key factor for me and a priority. Being a lecturer previously at university and being from a very deprived area and having pockets of deprivation in Dudley, it's really important that actually this is on the agenda, not just for the government, but for me as well. So I've got lots of colleagues that work full-time in education, and I've seen and heard firsthand that we've got a system that's in crisis. We've had a decade of missed opportunities and missed national recruitment targets, and I'm thinking about what can we do to make a change. So I started thinking about what are the three things, or what kind of things we can do forward. So first thing is value, stability and reform. Value, I think we need to value our teachers and what they do day in and day out every single day, not just for the students that are really struggling, but also for the students that they want to thrive and push them through to university, put them through to Oxbridge, put them into T-levels or vocational or apprenticeships. And I don't think we say thank you enough to our teachers. I'm a public servant myself, physiotherapist, and been working as a physio for a decade. And when I see a patient, I don't see a patient and say, we're done at 5 o'clock. If that patient needs to be gone to A&E or whether that person needs an extra 15 minutes, you need to have a parents-teacher meeting, or whether you need to give them a little bit more advice and guidance and homework. I know teachers do that all the time, and I don't think we value teachers enough. So for me, the first thing as a government, which we are doing, and I will be also, think it's paramount that we should be doing, is actually thank you to our teachers. And it's not just thank you once in a blue moon, but it's the time that we do all the time. And it's just like when we are clapping for the NHS staff, it's not for once a day. And in the pandemic, it's what we should be doing all the time. And it's not just looking at what's been done before. We can't shy away of what position we're in currently at the moment. We've had a cost of living crisis, we've had the Liz Truss mortgage meltdown, we've had the pandemic, and it's affected families across, every sector, and this is all including teachers. So young teachers are coming to the profession should be paid appropriately, and I think that should be a bar set. We've ensured school teachers have received 5.5 pay rise this year, providing 1.1 billion of funding to schools that are fully costed. And I think we need to incentivise teachers coming into teaching, and that it's not just extremely rewarding, which I know it is, but it's also the fact that we should be giving the flexibility of working, whether it's working from home or some alternative arrangements, and that there needs to be a better work-life balance. And I know that myself, and I know when there's lots of young women that are coming into teaching, you've got to understand they also have children that they may need to pick up, drive, or do something accordingly. Stability. So value, I think, is in paramount, and stability. So a Labour government has building a strategy for reduce child poverty, which devastates the life chances of over 4 million children. So in the summer, through the holiday activities through programme, we provided funding for 3 million holiday club spaces across for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. We know that if you are from a disadvantaged background, you're more likely to be distracted, you haven't had your breakfast in the morning, you're more likely to misbehave. And this all is in the network in teaching workforce. If you know you're coming in to school, you're going to be teaching, the children are misbehaving, we need to look at this in a multifaceted approach and not just think about, well, we'll just look at education, that's it. It's also about what's happening with the children that are coming in. We're looking at youth centres and what we can do to try and stop these distractions. So stability is something that we definitely need to be doing. And that's obviously breaking down opportunities. I think we also need to drive up teaching, learning, recruitment, so which is what we've also mentioned. So already with 6,500 more teachers, and not just covering we don't want just teachers covering just subjects that they know, but and all sorts of subjects. We want specialist teachers in the right area teaching the right students, so that their specialism is actually being optimised. It's not just saying, right, okay, we've got lots of cover, we've got loads of capacities to cover, and we need to spread these teachers out thin. No, that doesn't work, and that only increases stress levels, and which you've already mentioned before, which doesn't help. So, as I always say, you wouldn't want to come and see me to do, as I always come back to my physio roots, you wouldn't want to see me do respiratory physio when I'm a musculoskeletal specialist and I do joints and I don't do ITU. So it's the same sort of procedure. You don't want to see, you want your teachers to be specialised where they are. So stability is what we are saying we will be giving. Reform, which I think is the word of conference for many different industries that we'd like to reform, including the healthcare system. And that's just raising standards across all schools, the broader curriculum, getting more excellent teachers, more mental health support, access to arts, culture and sports. And in the important step of launching the curriculum and assessment review, working with Ofsted, listening to professionals, to young people, to parents at schools, and improving accountability and standards itself. I think we also need to be committed to improving inclusivity in mainstream schools for children with SEND. I think that's really important to bring up standards and access to SEND. I know someone just saying, oh yeah, I know, I agree. And that every decision that we make and every child gets the right education and has the ability to reach their potential. So more broadly, the government is committed to a comprehensive strategy for post-16 to break down the barriers of opportunity, support development of a skilled workforce, which drives economic growth and the industrial strategy itself. So change has begun, which I think is fantastic. It's only been a few months since we've been in government, and things are only going to get better. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our panelists. I have one question that I'd like to put to Sarah and Sonia, and then I'll put it out to the floor for the whole panel. Obviously, the 6,500 teachers recruitment target is something that was set out a few years ago. You know, the gap last year between recruitment and the targets that the government sets was over 13,000. So it is a, I mean, if 6,500 was the target a few years ago, it's clearly a bigger problem now than it was before. Do you envisage that target moving as the need moves? Because it's been raised that the primary pupil numbers have started falling. You are going to start to see a bit of a change in the demand as that moves into secondary. Is that something that's flexible, or are we just fixed at 6,500 new teachers? Sarah, if you can go first.
I think that obviously the biggest challenge for any politician, I think, is everyone wants a number so they can hold you accountable to it, and the numbers are the hardest thing to give because they move constantly, on any across any policy area. So I think that hopefully we've got a slightly more pragmatic approach to government now, which is about actually meeting the demand and the need rather than being fixated. But clearly the public won't be so forgiving on that. So, but then equally, I think the reality is that what do the public really understand of what those 6,500 teachers look like, just like what do they really understand of the £22 billion black hole? So I think, I wouldn't necessarily expect our communications to massively change, but that, again, the sort of the discussions and the priorities and the strategy in government is to actually make sure the 6,500 represents the problem of we want every every classroom to have a skilled teacher in it so that every child is in front of a subject expert when they're being taught. That's the principle that's driving us, not the number, I think is what I would say.
Yeah, fair enough. Sonia, do you have any thoughts on that, and whether that sort of, the ambitions for it need to be sort of dynamic and moving as we go forward?
Yeah, I think it needs to be quite fluid. We've got changing workforce, and we've got different industries needing more. We're progressing quite quickly in like tech and engineering, so we've got to meet the demands of the workforce and the economy. So we may need different types of teachers as we go through we get to 2020s, 2040s. So I think it's about being adaptable and looking at what the workforce is, and then sort of working in lockstep with industry.
Thank you. I'm going to throw out questions from the floor. We've got about 15 minutes left. Wow, lots of questions. That's great, because I've been in these before where one hand shoots up and then I have to improvise for 15 minutes, and it's much harder to do when you've got a load of people looking at you. So we'll take one here, one over there. You go ahead, yes.
Helen Stevenson, Liverpool Riverside. A couple of the panel members mentioned leadership and the impact that leadership has on recruitment and retention. Across most other sectors, including other public sector bodies, you have leaders who have experience from other industry backgrounds. I'd be interested to know that has happened to a very small extent within the multi-academy trust area of schools, what the panel's views are on leaders from outside coming into the education world.
That's great, thank you. Yes, and yes.
Thank you. A lot of the panel have mentioned flexible working as one of the ways to remedy the workforce crisis, and I just wonder how realistic that is compared to maybe other sectors where you can maybe work 3, 4, 5 days a week from home, and for a teaching profession, it just doesn't feel as competitive at all possible.
Right, well, we'll do those two for now so that I don't start forgetting questions. I think I'll, if I can come to Leora on the sort of outside expertise coming into the sector, and then Tom, if you could say a bit more about flexible working, because the questioner is right. It's not an easy thing to do in schools. It's not necessarily a natural thing that we've done traditionally. Leora.
Helen, great question. Thank you. So I think the answer to that isn't entirely straightforward. Because I do think that to lead a school, you need the domain-specific knowledge of education, and particularly you've got to know how to improve a school. And I think that means you do have to come up through a professional pathway to know something about what it means to educate children, to lead schools, to improve schools. I think when you start getting into the leadership of a multi-academy trust, which I suspect is where your question really was, it kind of depends on the size of the trust. So the leadership challenge of a multi-academy trust is a little bit different from leading a single school. You do start to get other domains that become important in executive leadership. So we do have very, very talented leaders in the school system who've not come up through the head teacher route and are not teachers. So Lucy Haller at Arc School's one of the most successful multi-academy trusts in the country. So certainly possible, but Lucy is leading at scale, and I think that's a bit different. The sector itself, the trust sector, still around 75% of the trust sector has trusts that are 5 schools or fewer. That's quite small organisations where your executive leader is still very intimately connected with the improvement function. And I think it would be hard at that scale because you're going to be more hands-on, not to have that domain-specific expertise. So I don't think the answer is straightforward, but I think as we see trust grow, we possibly will see more leaders from outside of education coming in to lead school trusts.
Thanks, Laura. Tom, flexible working, is it really realistic in schools?
So I want to make the argument, first of all, why teaching is such a flexible job. So my mum became a teacher, and the reason she became a teacher was because she could have the summers and the holidays and the weekends. She was working shifts at the time in a store, and so it was a very flexible job to do. And in the end, my mum was the teacher at the village school, and me and my 2 brothers would go with her every day, and we'd walk home with her at the end, and we'd have the weekends and the holidays together. And somewhere along the line, we've forgotten to sell the benefits of what a great job teaching is, and also how flexible it can be. And actually, to have a professional job that you can leave at a fairly reasonable time. You don't work shifts, and you shouldn't need to work at weekends. And there's quite a long holiday period. That if you work in the right school and the right trust, you don't need to spend a lot of time to work in. So I just sort of challenge the premise that we've never traditionally been good at flexible working in education, because I don't think that's true. It's obviously more difficult because the children need to go every day, and unless we're going to save up a 9-day fortnight for children and young people, which I don't think we are, then of course that is more challenging to do than say, well, no one comes into the office on a Friday. So there is something that's a bit, that's more challenging, but nevertheless it can be done. We see it. I mean, with Dixon's, it's astonishing. They've done it as a trust policy, but actually each individual school has solved their own problem in different ways. At the primary school when I was head, this is going back to 2014, each of the 7 year groups in the primary school, we had job shares across each of those. So we had 3 teachers in each of the 7 years who all had a way of managing that between them, and working mums who were balancing a home life. So I think there's a lot that's inherent in teaching that we should sell rather than just talk about how difficult it is and what problems are. But of course there is more for us to do in terms of being able to be confident in finding those solutions as well.
Yeah, I maybe should have said that it's hybrid working that the sector hasn't traditionally done. And there's that discussion, isn't there, about PPA time at home and how that's managed and stuff around there.
Yeah. Just one more point, if I may, which is to do with leadership and development. That's come up, and to be quite specific about things that could be done in the short term, because lots of these things are sort of big, longer term things. We introduced 3 years ago a reformed set of national professional qualifications, including a reformed national professional qualification for headship. It was a big leap in terms of the quality of the programme. I was fortunate to be involved in the design and some of the work around that. And it's been free for all schools in the country for the last 3 years. One thing that government could do is to commit to making that the national professional qualifications available again for all schools in the country, and that's a really good example of where we know high quality professional development can act as both something people enjoy and a retention benefit, as well as helping people to get better results.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, those MPQs were the victim of a sort of cost-cutting drive by the previous government. So we don't yet know what current government is going to do about that. A couple more questions. There was one here in the second row, and also there in the second row as well. And if we try and do 3, we'll do Anna as well at the same time, who's also there. So 1, 2, 3, and then we'll try one more round after that.
Hiya, this is a really great panel on my favourite topic, so thank you so much today. I'm Maggie, I'm a full-time teacher in Battersea in London. I'm the head of sixth form. This year I go in late on a Monday, and it has really changed my life and been a massive improvement. I've got a friend who works at Dixon's. He's very excited about this 1 day a week thing. So it's small stuff, but it's amazing for morale. So I think we do need to think about these things. I have loads of questions, but one I was going to ask the panel was, like, working in teaching over the last decade, it's like shifting sands. It feels very radical, the changes that have been made over the last 10 years in terms of like fragmentation and sort of the number of schools that have moved into academy trusts. And I'm not making a judgment on that. That can be good or bad, and you can have a discussion about that. But it is a massive change, right? So if you think of like how many schools were academies in 2010, how many are now, it's a radical change. And I think that kind of is a theme in education. It's like lots of change all the time. And then you have COVID as well, which was very, very disruptive for people. And my experience of the profession and with my colleagues is that everyone's like quite overwhelmed all the time, is the only way I can describe it. And what I wondered is, how can we create stability structurally, and that might create stability professionally and for retention, was my question to you.
Thank you. We'll do the 2 others in the second row here, and then we'll try for one last round afterwards.
Yeah, thanks for that. My name is Kat Hickey. I'm from the Zoological Society of London, and we work with schools, colleges and universities in terms of teacher training. The question that I have is, we have a lot of programming in which we are trying to create access to nature through the curriculum, and how they're teaching the curriculum, actually teaching outside. And we know from evidence that it increases student well-being as well as teacher well-being, reduces and increases attendance, increases attainment. And we're doing a lot of work around with teacher retention of actually how we can support teachers to kind of have the confidence to be able to speak with their students and put biodiversity and climate change into their curriculum and kind of thread nature through the curriculum. So, and as someone who employs people in our zoos, I get hundreds of teachers in our environmental education when a position goes up, and it's always interesting to hear why they want to leave the profession and move into still staying in education. So I suppose it would be really interesting to hear from the panel the role that learning outside the classroom and embedding nature into the curriculum can have on teacher retention.
All right, I'll keep it brief, Freddie.
No
So
worries.
I'm Anna Trippihui, I'm from AQA, England's largest exam board. Firstly, I just wanted to say how refreshing it is that we have MPs on the panel who have done stuff before in their lives and bring that richness into the discussion. It's not straight into politics without understanding things in the round. I used to be a teacher myself. Sonia, I think your point about reform and stability, they sit in tension, right?
Yeah.
And I know, I totally understand when I left the classroom, it was significant change already then, and that was 10 years ago. So question, in the curriculum and assessment review, what would you like to see changed and what would you like to not to see changed? Or at least, what would your cautionary note be, as well as, here's something you could look at. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to leave those with our 2 MPs, because I think that the stability point is a really, really important one. There's going to be a lot of change. There has been a lot of change. How do you build in some stability while you're doing that and protect the sector from more and more churn? And I think you can take the question about the role of learning outdoors and that as well, and address others.
Yeah, I think I'm going to touch on all 3. So I spent a year with the Big Change Foundation thinking about reform of the education system, and we did a lot of speaking to obviously children, young people, teachers and parents, and this is the tension, because no surprise to anyone in the room, when you got the kind of the all these responses back, when we like had young people leading these conversations about the change they wanted and what they wanted to see in the purpose of their education system, and asking some really big questions, and we brought them together with the adults. We had these intergenerational conversations, and a few things came out of the kind of research that was happening. One of them was that, like, when you speak to each of those groups, they all thought it was working for somebody else. So they thought the system as it is currently was like, well, it must be working for them over there. Even to the teachers, they even were like, well, it obviously kind of is working, isn't it? The parents were like, well, it's not really working for my child, but it's working for someone else's child, isn't it? The children, well, it's kind of working for me. I'm one of the high achievers, but I can see it's not working for my classroom classmates. So there was this kind of unanimous sense of like, we want to see, people do want change. They want it to be better than it is today, and it's not working as it currently is, alongside an overwhelmed workforce that feels like they're constantly having change done to them. And that's why it's so important about this, the how we do the change. It's not just about the change that we're thinking about. And I actually believe in terms of like change management, often it's how you do the change that creates the change that you want to see as well. And so I think that, and some of the change I really believe in, and I'll be sort of advocating for, is absolutely, if you go back to the recruitment and retention problem, if children are happier in the classroom, they learn more. That is just fact. Well, we strip out all the stuff that they enjoy, and then we get frustrated that they're misbehaving, and particularly the children that need to be in the classroom the most. We take away the stuff they don't enjoy. So actually, there's a way through here where some of it is, dare I use the term, because I hated it when they created that common sense minister. But some of this is actually quite commonsensical, and it's just, but equally, we need to really emphasize with the sector, we are doing this with you. This is not going to be done to you, and we need to say that, and then we need to act on it. It needs to be, deeds, not just words. Because absolutely, be it more education outside, be it a greater focus on the creative subjects, as well as sport and PE and those opportunities. I went to school for my final few years, and I was reasonably academic. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't. I loved drama, and if it wasn't for drama, I wouldn't have been bothered I wouldn't have put in what I did to my other subjects, and that's true for many students, isn't it? So I think, it's how we do the change. Absolutely, we need to be thinking about that curriculum review. For me, I'm hoping what's going to come out of that work, and obviously, it is independent, but I'm hoping what's going to come out of that is a greater focus on how we bring joy back into the classroom, because for teachers and for children, that's going to be transformational.
Thank you. Sonia, your thoughts on that would be appreciated as well.
I think on the back of what Sarah said about implementation is absolutely key. I think teachers welcome Ofsted review, and the fact that we've now scrapped this one word, good, inadequate or whatever. I think teachers are generally quite happy that this is going, and it doesn't help anyone's well-being rushing around when Ofsted come and trying to proceed or produce results and getting teachers and students into classrooms and attendance, and actually that doesn't help anyone's well-being in any way or form when an inspection is happening. So I think in terms of a decade of change you were saying, Maggie, and how people can be overwhelmed, we're hoping that actually when we start removing some of these barriers that are causing people, students and for staff to feel quite stressed and quite anxious, that we start removing that, but actually bring more supporting mechanisms with having more mental health specialists in schools, with making sure that we're not looking at it from a one only teaching point of view, but a multifaceted point of view. We're looking at, getting free school meals, looking at child poverty, looking at how we can bring in, youth centres. I think it's got to look all the way at what's going on with society as a whole, instead of just looking at what the education system's doing, which is why we're doing so much great work with working with Ms. Kendall, with Bridget Phillipson. We're doing cross-governmental work instead of just looking in isolations and silos. As we know, working in silos never works if you don't look at something in all of its beauty in one way. So I think that is one thing. Nature, 100% as a physiotherapist, I would say everyone should be running around outside, getting loads of activity and exercise. So I agree, we should be, incorporating more outside time, which also will help with childhood obesity, getting more kids out and about, will help with well-being and getting to know nature. So I'm on board with that already. I think tech and AI, which I think we haven't mentioned, which is really going to be important to help people come away from schools and doing traditional learning, but looking at alternative ways of learning. I'm not suggesting in any form that it all should go online, because having done my MSc during pandemic online, I'm not saying it's the best way of teaching, but it's maybe a combination or a hybrid. I think that would really work quite effectively. In terms of the curriculum, was it Anna, was it? Yes, for that question. I think we're just going to wait and see what comes out of this. Really, I don't like to speculate too much on how we will change things, but I think, like I said as the end, as my closing remarks before, change is begun, and I think we are all putting in ideas, thinking about what we can do for the betterment of the education system and for students and for teachers. So yeah, I think we're going forward in a hopeful manner, which is what we should be doing. And the last decade of so many missed opportunities that we've had, and I think having a Labour government, give us a bit more time, and we'll get there hopefully with better strategy.
Thank you, Sonia. Do we have time for another round of questions, or do I need to finish?
Can I just ask Maggie about? So,
of course.
I suppose I always come back to what's reasonable. All of us in any profession, we have a deal with our employer, don't we? Pay me on time, I'll do my work, you support me. And it does probably feel like I'm channeling the aura, but we've got 50%, give or take, of the country under MATs, schools under MATs, and 50% maintained. And maybe on this particular issue, there is a nuanced difference between what it means to be a teacher and maintained or not, I'm not sure. But regardless, there's an intermediary structural feature, which is the MAT itself, for example, that can help teachers navigate. What government doesn't really control that much beyond money, buildings, and the pay package. Everything else is down to the individual leadership team. So, I suppose I'm interested. What would because we can't have improvement in standards and quality of education without some change. Like, change is coming one way or another. So, and certain kinds of professional teachers lean into that change and love it because it drives them. Some are, nervous about it. In a sense, the structural unit that is going to navigate that is your school, your particular MAT, your particular community that you're in. It's not just about the school staff and the school leadership parents. So I'm interested what you think is reasonable. Yeah.
No, that discussion might have to happen once we finish. I'm really sorry, I have been told we do have to stop now because I think there's another panel desperate to get in here and discuss something else. So thank you all for answering the questions. Thank you for coming and asking them. And it's, sounds like some things are going to happen that are quite exciting. So looking forward to hearing more about those as we go forward. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.